I'm one of the partners in Flashpoint, a secondary fund. So obviously we'll be talking about, a topic that is close to our hearts, and just to introduce the general idea for the topic that, obviously we've seen an unprecedented market in the tech VC world over the past, let's say, 5 years. With unprecedented amount of capital being raised and very, very high valuations. That has changed. It's been a great market, obviously, for companies that were growing and were successful, like all the companies that we have on the panel right now. But we've seen quite a change in the market recently, and the world is now very different than it was a year and a half ago, right? So, both in terms of valuations, availability of capital, but also in terms of macro environment, inflation, interest rates, or just basically simply volatility in the equity markets. So it is probably, let's say, the exit timelines or liquidity timelines are being postponed in these markets. Yet investors or early shareholders, there may be some needs for liquidity, and obviously secondary markets are one of the solutions. And we know that obviously selling shareholders would like that because they would like a liquidity when they need to. But the question is, how do the companies or the founders look at those kinds of transactions? And that is the topic that we would want to discuss a little bit on this panel. So I would want to introduce the participants, and I said it's quite rare to have 3 unicorn companies from our region present in one panel. So thank you very much for the participation. So first, Haim, Sasson, President and CFO at OpenWeb. Maybe if you could put, just like 1 or 2 sentences about OpenWeb, just for the audience.
Yeah, sure. Thanks you, Lukas, and thanks for having me in this panel. OpenWeb is a community engagement platform for the open internet. We work with some of the most top digital publishers in the world, from Fox, News Corp, Daily Mail, Yahoo, Rich PLC, and we provide them with a platform for driving healthy conversation and engagement across their sites. Our platform helps them to register more users, takes ownership on their audience, making them from unknown to known, keeps visitor engaged, stay longer in the website, and helps the publishers with building the first-party relationships with their users on a transparent and privacy-first activation.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. Then we have here Stan Bokov, one of the co-founders of TradingView. Hey, Stan.
Hey, Lukas. Thanks for inviting me to this panel. So a couple of words about TradingView. We are a combination of a social network and a research platform that helps regular everyday investors make better decisions about what to invest in and what to trade. So we are a subscription platform, not a broker, but we work with multiple partners. So you can basically go on there, do your research, talk to other people, read what people post. And then if you want to trade, you can trade through one of the supported brokers.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Stan. Glad to have you on the panel. And we have also Tamara Orlova, the CFO of Flow Health.
Hi, Lukas. Thank you. Excited to be on the panel. So a couple words about Flow. Flow is a product company in female health segments. Our product is called Flow, just as the company, and it's quite massive. We have almost 55 million monthly active users worldwide. It kind of translates, for example, into each 8th woman in states using product on monthly basis. The product has been formed around period tracker as the core functionality, and then we started adding a lot of additional features and content on top of that. So now we sort of migrated into more holistic female health partner rather than just being a tracker. So quite an exciting journey. Happy to share experience we had so far on the secondaries topic.
Excellent. So here's the first question. So a general question. Obviously, you have been very successful companies having a lot of interest from investors, but I know that each one of you have done at some point in time in some shape or form some secondaries. Obviously the details are confidential, but just your general views. What do you think about secondaries? Are they just a distraction from the company's perspective, or can they be useful in any way? Maybe Haim again. Good.
Yeah, for us, I would start with primary. Raising primary is all about building versus buying. We were active lately in the M&A activity, acquiring 3 companies in the last 12 months. So we are very thoughtful about dilution, and we don't want to take money when we don't need it. So if there is no need for new capital, we do see secondary as a great tool to bring great people and partners into the cap table. We are very lucky to have a very value-added investor so far added to the cap table, and we always seeking for new opportunities to bring more good people while we are mindful about dilution. So this is our 2 cents about it.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Stan, your views as a co-founder?
Yeah, I believe it's always about context. It's what the company needs. It's what the employees need. So, what Haim said makes a lot of sense. Some companies require a steady flow of new capital. So they always spend more than they make, or they undertake new sort of directions and whatnot. So then there isn't a question whether they need primary capital, right? When you don't need primary capital, when you're making enough money, obviously it doesn't make sense to spend the time and the energy to do that. Secondary is obviously very different, and it could be a distraction if you do it too often or unnecessarily, but sometimes some people want to take some chips off the table, right? Which that wouldn't make them less motivated. It would actually, kind of perhaps ease some concerns, and it's a great opportunity to let some value-added investors in, because that's always you're looking for that. The investor, in an ideal world, every investor is super value-add, right? Whatever that value may be at a given stage, whatever it is that you're looking for, whether it's high-end connections or everyday hands-on help, which is, I guess, more true for earlier stage companies. But it's all about context. It's you got to use the right tool in the right place at the right time. You don't want to hammer in a nail with a microscope type of thing.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Depends on the stage of the company. And Tamara, from your perspective as a CFO, obviously, secondaries and primaries and secondaries both kind of like come with some form of due diligence. There's obviously this notion that basically secondary should be light, but at the end of the day, from the point of view of investor, it's the same. It's investing money for shares of a company. So how do you see that if no money is coming to the company? So you as a CFO need to be involved in the processes for the secondaries, but no money is coming in.
Yeah. So I would agree with Stan in terms of it's all about the context. I think some companies need it more, some companies need it less. It's certainly always still a bit of a distraction, again, depending on the form of the transaction and the form of participation of the company in the transaction. But you're right, Lukas, it's still new investor, especially if it's new investor coming in, it's still kind of similar process in terms of them needing to understand what they're stepping into, all the details, information, due diligences, documents, etc. So it's a massive process, especially if a new investor is coming in. In terms of kind of context, it can be very helpful for consolidating cap table a little bit in case it's kind of helpful for the company. I think in a world where KYCs from all different partners are becoming more and more deep and more complicated, it might make sense sometimes. Sometimes we see banks requesting information for shareholders that own 1% of the shares. So it's just, I never saw it 5 years ago. So I guess it's a topic to consider. And then also the complexity is dependent, I think, on the shareholding structure. And like if you have millions different types of shares, classes of shares, etc., it kind of makes secondaries, I guess, more effort consuming, time consuming, and just more complex in general. But I also think that kind of this type of transactions can provide comfort not only to investors that participate, but also for other investors, just as an opportunity to anchor valuation, as an opportunity to see a bit of liquidity and a bit of mobility of capital. That's kind of could be nice. And in terms of anchoring valuation, one thing always to consider in our case, for example, for sure, would be like, what is that valuation? How would that be viewed by different parties involved, including employees? Like if we are doing ESOPs and there is like new valuation introduced, would that be beneficial in terms of how we can present it inside the company or not? Again, it's very contextual. There would be other companies that probably would have different perspective on that, but that's kind of how I see that.
Thank you. Yeah, that leads me to another question, because you mentioned, let's say, the price and how would it be viewed internally. So what is your view? How should these processes be conducted? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, a secondary transaction is a transaction not between the company and an investor, but between a third party and an investor. It's a shareholder in a company, and the SPA is actually then bilateral, usually between the shareholder and the buying investor. So do you think these transactions should be left for those parties to figure it out, or do you think that the company or the founders should be in a way in control, or really, let's say, the gatekeepers to these kind of transactions? Maybe Stan, your view.
I don't want to be the first one.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so Haim.
I can go first if you want.
Yeah, Tamara, you volunteered to go first.
Yeah,
okay, so.
I did. So yeah, I think it's a complicated question, because on one hand, I think any sort of participation of the company, especially if it's a formal sign-off with a blocking right, is quite an ask from investors, because that's their shares. They're free to make their choices and free to establish their valuations. Same time, I think like when the company is just growing, it's kind of business as usual. I don't think it's necessary, and I don't think like investors are necessarily open for that. Same time, when it comes to a transaction or it comes to a later stage, we probably also examples where all of a sudden a very minor investor starts a litigation process about a deal that was closed a number of years ago on the sort of price not being fair, especially if there is some sort of like larger consolidation going on, some sort of complicated swapping, etc. So in that sense, having a clear kind of auditable process, maybe not a complex one, but the one that is established, the one that is documented, and the one that can sort of help manage any sort of shareholder conflict or potential shareholder dispute in future would be helpful. But it's always a bit of a conversation, I guess, to have with investors, because there is a trade-off. There is like full freedom versus a bit of shared control, I guess, But
yeah, understood. Well, I mean, because what you touched upon is almost like to have, let's say, traceable and professional process in terms of documenting and having the right documentation. And I guess everybody would agree with that, right? Because at the moment value is transferred, hands, obviously there can be, everybody is happy at that time when they agree, but then they might not remember that they were happy at the time that they agreed, basically 2 years later. And they and memories tend to be selective, and and people then can come back with other things. But I guess my question was that should the company be kind of, let's say, okay, like if there is a sale, okay, then fine, let me organize it as a company rather than, okay, whatever you guys agree, I don't care, just come to me when the deal is done. Haim, maybe your view.
Yeah, I think that everything we do, every decision that we make need to come with full alignment between company, board, shareholders, in interest to maximize shareholders' value. Eventually, there is no distinction between company, founders, management, and board shareholders. If it makes sense, we are all in the same boat. I'm a shareholder too. And the price, for instance, is something that is very important. It should be a decision that we will take together with the board, with the shareholders. So existing shareholders and investors are partners that supported us a long way, and they are stakeholders in this decision. And ultimately, it's an outcome for the company. Like secondary transaction, it's not a silo transaction. It's not a standalone event. Low valuation, for instance, of a secondary can damage the ability in raising funding in the good valuation next round. So I think it should be full collaboration between all stakeholders and company, not necessarily only management, also board and existing investors need to take part in this decision of making this transaction and to determine together the terms.
Yeah. And that's actually also something I kind of meant behind the documentation and the process. Like that's sort of part of it, like how the valuation was done, how the price was
established,
kind of valued, established.
100%.
It is important, both for like alignment at the moment, but also like what's happening afterwards. Would there be any potential conflicts at any point in future around this?
Yeah,
I agree with both. Yeah.
Okay.
And it touches on the question that we had before. You're busy, whatever, 8, 12, 16 hours a day thinking about the company, and a secondary transaction can potentially be seen as a distraction that you don't need this right now. From the point that you have to spend time on it as CFOs while no money is coming into the company, right? At the same time, like both Tamara and Haim mentioned, it's always a balance between it's sort of a free market and it's your shares and you do what you want with them, and the need to be careful not to impact other shareholders in the company negatively because you're all in the same boat. So I'm leaning towards, so if a company is, Apple, whatever, traded publicly, right? You can buy a couple of shares, sell a couple of shares at that point without affecting anybody, and you're not acquiring any sort of crazy rights that can potentially negatively affect the company down the line. When it's a smaller market and a new person is coming into the company as a new shareholder, I think it would be irresponsible to just say, you guys do whatever you want and then come to me later. So I don't know what the ideal process looks like, but I do agree that it's something that needs to be sat down, addressed by the board, by the shareholders, figured out some sort of process. So you do, as a company, have to spend time on it and moderate it. Because you want, every new investor at any point is until the company is public, is pretty much part of the family, right? And they have to, potentially affect you positively or negatively. So you have to regulate that with a process that makes sense to everybody. And actually, however much you want to get back to, doing stuff that is company growing related, this is potentially can be seen as one of those. If you add the right people to the cap table, it's not something that I think should be blown off lightly.
Understood. That leads me to another question about, let's say, part of the family. So it's kind of like how should and also leads to the whole valuation, right? Because obviously the question is, how should the process be run? Should it be a wide process with like a number, really, let's say, widely marketed with a number of parties, potential buyers who in a way almost, let's say, bid on the price, which would probably be price maximizing? Or should it be more kind of contained process with, let's say, the circle of trust kind of, like the close people that you kind of already know, and that you would be, as a company, let's say, comfortable on a cap table, potentially? Whoever wants to go first. I'm not assigning now anymore.
I can go first. I think that we historically prefer to keep it within the circle of friends. I think that cap table composition is very important for us as a management, and our opportunity to bring a great and valued partners into our business. And there are also other considerations, as we mentioned, price, valuation are important. So we will always be happy to engage with a number of parties and to be thoughtful on the process. But I think that eventually something so intimate that I think should be remain in that matter.
Okay, so circle of trust basically is one vote. Tamara, maybe?
I guess for us it depended on the circumstances. Like, for example, we had situations where some of the secondaries became part of a new round, and in this context, it was marketed to a broader range of investors, and it made sense because it was part of larger transactions. So we kind of were able to, I guess, discuss it with wider range of investors. And in other cases, I would agree with what Haim said, like it just almost naturally usually flows into existing investors or communities around existing investors. So there might be someone new, but kind of brought but by someone internal. So in that sense, it kind of stays within close circle.
Understood. So
I agree. I mean, sorry, just jumping in here quick.
No, sure.
I mean, I totally agree. It's always contextual. It's obvious, right? And it does tend to flow towards that sort of people or closer circle anyway. I lean that way too, but just because I kind of view risk management as sort of outweighing maximizing the price at a given time. If you're doing stuff well, you're going to grow. I'm not saying take a price that's completely not realistic, but I think it's sort of more important to focus on not bringing in someone crazy that's going to mess with your life. No matter how you structure the agreements, the person can, start knocking on your door every 2 hours or something like that. I'm not saying that this happened to us, but the thought of something potentially messing up, in my mind personally, is more important to limit that versus like saying, let's get the maximum dollar right now. I mean, you'll get that if you're doing things the right way. So that's my view.
Understood. So I think we have, well, with some caveats, I think all three votes more for the circle of trust rather than a wide 200 guest wedding. So now maybe to the valuations, because it was already mentioned that obviously we've seen very let's say good market in terms of valuations for the companies over the past a couple of years. That has changed quite recently. Obviously there is a bit of a getting used to the new valuation metrics that are on the market, plus whole market is very volatile. It's almost kind of like hard to find the right benchmark, the valuation benchmarks, and what should be the right prices. And at these circumstances, secondaries, particularly if people need liquidity, can happen at quite substantial discounts, because that's basically simply the nature of the product. If people need, let's say, liquidity sooner, how do you view this? Is this a concern for you? Maybe, let's say, for the company for the future raising, because ultimately secondary transactions are not usually published, right? It's not like a primary transaction where the valuation is in a way, let's say, communicated to the market. These are, and especially if we are talking about a circle of trust, they can be, let's say, really within a closed circle of people. But how do you view this? What is your sensitivity towards kind of being, let's say, these valuations at a very different price than your last primary, or where you would want to raise primary, let's say 1-2 years time? So whoever wants to go first again.
Yeah, I just mentioned that, like, for our perspective, secondary is not a standalone transaction. It's something that, like, taking into consideration market assess secondary prices for an evaluation, take it into consideration, for instance. So there is an impact. There is an impact also of perception of value. So, and it can harm next round primary fundraising. I think that, again, if we will be thoughtful on the process, we will be collaborative with the selling side, and again, fully alignment between board, shareholders, and the company. We should agree to a discount that should be reasonable and minimal. Of course, secondary transaction should be discounted versus, like, preferred shares. Less preferred shares, for sure. Ordinary versus preferred, no doubt, but it should be minimal and reasonable and in very low percentage, I think, again, to reflect the ability to not harm future transaction.
I would, I guess I would second Haim on that in terms, that's I think in line with what I sort of see with investors. Like, people do not want to give too much of a discount for different classes of shares. Yes, like, if you go for a proper formal valuation, you'll probably see a larger difference, but in real world, people are getting quite close on different classes of shares, common, preferred, etc. In terms of how this is perceived and is it good or bad, I guess dependent on the size of transaction. If it's a large transaction, it will definitely be quite noticeable, even if it's a secondary. It would be hard to justify, for example, again, I'm repeating myself a little bit here, but it would be hard to justify, for example, why your ESOP is being granted on older valuation when there was a new secondary transaction of a considerable size, maybe with a third party involved. And if all of a sudden it changes your ESOP allocation, it can be quite significant, because if it's a down round, if it's not a down round, but if it's on reduced valuation, you all of a sudden have to distribute larger number of shares if your ESOP is attached to dollar value. So it's all kind of details, but I'm just trying to say that it's very it is impactful, and it can be impactful in many different ways, starting from your kind of next round, but also, like, immediately on your internal decisions, like ESOP, for example.
Understood. Yep.
So from again, my point of view, so our business is in the world of markets and trading. So for the last 10 years, all we do is allow people to research the markets and futures, crypto. We were there before crypto was a thing. So you see kind of trends and patterns, and it's all cyclical, right? This is a market just like any other. And there are sometimes circumstances that are good for sellers and sometimes that are good for buyers. It's all a question of who needs what when, and that balances the desire and ability to ask for discounts or to give discounts, right? If you kind of put yourself in a position where you don't need money, then it's not much of a concern to you. You just wait until it changes. I mean, yeah, again, it's kind of obvious, but going back to the primary capital example, you're burning cash, you built your business model, the fact that you're burning cash, you put yourself in a dependency. You made cash, right? There's a different problem, but easier problem to solve is how to invest it effectively. Right? Same thing with secondary. If it's not a great market, but you need liquidity now, like I need it, whatever, the world's going to end, I need it now. Then of course you're going to be hit with a discount because you're not in a position to wait. But overall, I mean, secondaries in my mind should not be viewed as urgent. They should be viewed as part of a bigger picture, be put in balance at the right time. Yeah, so I mean, it's all contextual as always.
Understood. So, but as said, like there may be some, let's say, some sellers that need liquidity that would be willing to accept a price that maybe the company wouldn't like. Do you think the company should have a veto on a price? So basically to ban a transaction if it's at a price that you don't like.
It's going back to the question, and I'll jump in first here, that Haim mentioned that it should be an alignment between everybody, board, shareholders, and so on. So yeah, if a company is worth X billion and somebody wants to sell some shares and it's going to be noticed and it's public that way less than that could damage the company. So unless the views are aligned, I don't think it should be moving forward.
Okay, so you think there should be a way, for the company to stop it if there is such a transaction? Yeah. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I understand that it's hard because ultimately, you are in the market and people should be making their own decisions. But it looks like there are limits, basically.
Well, as I said before, risk management in my personal worldview is more important than, like, at this stage of company growth where it's not public, that should be more of a concern and therefore more regulated than complete financial freedom of selling whatever you want for how much you want, etc.
Understood.
I guess it all comes to certain level of transparency and certain level of kind of pre-established rules, I guess, because it's just about blocking something completely unreasonable rather than trying to sort of control kind of each little thing.
Yeah.
So I guess there's always a balance.
Yeah, understood. Like a reasonable, like kind of like a test of reasonableness, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If the market price is different now, if it has decreased and someone wants to sell, I guess it's reasonable and probably not much the company can do about it unless there is kind of more negotiations, more to be done there. But if it's just a incorrect price and completely
like a crazy outlier,
crazy looking transaction, then yeah, it again comes to something that can haunt a company years later.
Okay, 100%.
Yeah. Okay, and then if we are now talking about also, we were basically talking a lot about basically shareholders being partners and alignment of interest, and obviously how important the selection or the composition of the cap table is. Obviously, during the primary, it's all about, let's say, picking the right partners in it. But life is long, lives of companies are long, and priorities may change over time, right? And there may be misalignment between basically shareholders and the company. There may be different priorities. There may be sometimes basically shareholders are on just basically a different timelines that the company would be. So do you think and this is maybe a little bit controversial in kind of, because obviously, your early shareholders are supporting you, so basically that's always kind of like alignment in this, but there could be a time when this let's say relationship, or basically when there become like a certain, let's say, schism in the relationship. So do you think that the company should be active in terms of managing their cap table, in terms of also maybe encouraging some basically secondaries from their cap table, right? Don't know who wants to answer that first, because or if anybody wants to answer at all.
I can go first. I think more proactively about secondaries, that like it's a good opportunity to add good investors, as mentioned. So we specifically don't look to push any investors out or to recycle early investors, and secondary are less about like early liquidation for us. But like from the other end, recycling can and does happen naturally. So there are early investors who have been shareholders for a long time, like you mentioned, and invested from funds that the life cycle came to an end. So definitely we as a company will be happy to assist them with this situation. And if it's in line with the interest of adding good investors to the cap table, so win-win for both.
Yeah,
Okay.
I guess I agree with what Haim said. There is some natural movement there that just kind of can be aligned and executed together. I guess if we are not considering secondary as part of larger primary round, or some sort of exceptional secondary where like considerable share is being transferred, sometimes the size is just not the right is not right to attract strategic partners, growth funds that help you on the next stage, or so I guess again we're repeating it on every question. It's a bit contextual, right? It's sometimes secondary is not the best chance to get the right or like strategic investor on board, but it could be different, I guess, in different circumstances.
I understand. So in a way, like a one answer to all the questions on this is like, it depends. Basically.
Yeah, depends. That's an easy one as well. So.
Stan?
Well, it does depend. Always, right? I guess you can hypothetically come up with certain situations and then kind of decide what you would do there. And it, varies from company to company, within the same company, a different stage. Depends on the personalities of the founders and how the companies manage the process. So sometimes, and that's exactly a common situation where some early investors, they believed in you when, you were small. The life cycle of the funds ends, and they're like, all right, we got to pay our shareholders now. Can you help us out with that? And of course, it makes a lot of sense to help them out with that, not blow them off by saying, oh, we don't have time, this is not a priority for us, and so on. Like you have to be reasonable and friendly and in the spirit of a good partnership. And like Tamara said, sometimes the size of the secondary is not too big. Like it's not global. It's not going to affect the company as a whole. So while I think as a company in that situation, you can still spend the time to help with the process, not blow them off. And if it's not that big of a transaction, you can get some sort of a crazy strategic investor that'll help you, build rainbows and stuff. Then, you kind of still do your due diligence. If it's nobody, you don't get a lot of red flags right off the bat, then it's like, all right, well, so be it. right? And sometimes the right investors for the right companies at the right stages are the ones who just sit there and don't do anything. That's you don't always want activity.
Understood. Yeah. Horses for courses. And that leads me to the last question, at least, on my list that I had, is that obviously, each of the investors can be used for basically something, strategics. They can have very specific insights. Sector specific investors can be very useful in basically certain areas. Do you think that secondary investors are useful addition to a cap table? Obviously, I'm kind of a little bit blowing up, my own horn, but I don't know what you're going to answer. So, be gentle if you if you don't agree. Haim,
So
maybe.
for sure I agree with that. But I can say also that when the company is performing well and the right investors are partnering and it's on the cap table, those investors are typically also interested in additional opportunities to purchase more shares through secondary and to better position their holding in the company. So not necessarily, maybe there will be enough from the existing, so good partner can stay aside, but for sure the straight answer is yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
I would agree with everything said. I think always the additional kind of liquidity opportunity is good. It's just making everything healthier. And then, sometimes or many times secondaries end up being distributed across the cap table, across existing investors, and that's also reality. So kind of new secondary partners is still, I think, it's quite rare in a way, rare concept, but definitely healthy, definitely helpful.
I think an investor is an investor. Doesn't matter if it's primary, if it's secondary. If you feel like you want to help, you can be as useful or as useless as you choose to be. I mean,
Fair enough.
Yeah, and if there's a willingness from the company to receive that help, and if there's a need for it, then of course it makes sense. Whenever the right person comes along.
Fair enough. I'm told by Adriana that we have one question from the audience. So are we able to display it? So is this a question to me?
Yeah, it is.
Well, we try to be more
questions
active
for different.
Exactly. So I think it relates to everything that was said here. Also, like when there was really abundance of capital, let's say during the boom of the VC times, basically secondary, investors, and I would say that quite openly had sometimes troubles or let's say problem in a way, let's say getting to transactions because everybody just had a lot of cash that were throwing on anything that moved, and even let's say primary investors by DNA were doing a lot of secondary transactions just because they had the capital to deploy. In the current market, we see this changing slightly, right? So I think we are still basically focusing on the same things, right? So obviously we don't want to we do focus on the same things that the primary investors do. That the company in this current time, it's frugal with its cash, has enough basically cash runway, it's not dependent on the future primary. But we see that there may be specific opportunities of exits are being postponed, but fund lives are fixed. So people need liquidity, and especially at times when also interest rates are rising, cash is not for free anymore. So we see that one of the few areas where people can get let's say some liquidity is to sell assets, which obviously is not a bad place to be for a secondary investor. It would be also, I guess a question for the companies. Do you see now more interest from the secondary funds or the secondary investors now that I know that all of you are not let's say are concerned with dilution, and it was mentioned here. Obviously, secondary transactions are not dilutive. So, I understand that you are, let's say maybe if the primary is not in the stars right now, do you see secondary demand, like from the same investor saying, okay, fine, if I can't put in primary, am I able to buy some secondary then? Whoever wants to answer first.
I guess from my side, I would say I see how kind of more demand works on the other side, on like seller's side, because it was quite typical to have some secondaries attached to a new funding round. Now companies are trying to hold off to kind of save capital, to not go to the market too early. But investors can still have their desire to sell. So, and I guess one works with another, right? Supply works with the demand. So yeah, I guess I would say probably yes, but I see sort of the other side of it, maybe.
Understood.
I can say that regardless to the market condition, I cannot see any special interest in supply on demand than ever. Like,
okay, business as usual.
Business as usual.
Same thing here, really. I mean, I haven't noticed any sort of peaked drastic changes in terms of offers or something. Maybe it's happening to other players in the industry. I'm just not aware. But I mean, it's business as usual. Yeah.
Good. Well, that just confirms that you are in a good position, guys. Like one of the winners, really coming from our region. Really glad that you could join us on this panel. Hope the Andeans have enjoyed it. Hope you have enjoyed it. And this is the last panel of the day, I think. So again, thanks very much for joining, everyone, and have a nice day.